I
Okay.
have the pleasure of being here with my old friend Max van Egmond. Behind him is the cityscape of Amsterdam, where he is talking to us about his long career as a very distinguished singer. I know Max as a singer of early music, but I think he would resist that label. We'll see about that. I first came across him on recordings. He was the sort of standard bass baritone for that great series of recordings of Bach cantatas done jointly by Gustav Leonhardt and Harnoncourt in Vienna. But we've worked together, and he's been many years on the faculty of the Baroque Performance Institute at Oberlin, so he knows America. He's sung all around the world. And it is a great joy to see you, Max, and to have you talk to us today about your experiences in the world of early music. Can you say, what about, how did you get started as a musician, Max?
Okay, Tom, it'll be my pleasure to tell you a few things for your students and for yourself. Um, I have been very lucky all my life that I happen to be, as they say, at the right time on the right spot. As a child, I seemed to have a good voice, and my parents were encouraged by neighbors to have me take music lessons. And then as a teenager, I lived in a town called Naarden in Holland, where there was the big Bach choir of the Netherlands, Nederlandse Bachvereniging, Netherlands Bach Society. And already at the age of 18, I was allowed to participate in their choral productions of the Passions, of cantatas, of B minor Mass and Christmas Oratorio, all that year after year. So I was really bathed in Bach at a young age. On top of that, Holland is really an oratorio country. We know that in Italy, it's all opera, opera, opera. In Spain as well. In England, thank God you have both, and in the United States also. But Holland does have an opera theater, but devotes a lot more attention to oratorio. We have, in our little country, we have more passion performances every year than in all of Germany, which is, of course, the country where the Passions started. So I had all that to help me. So I got very used to the Bach tradition at an early age. And it just so happened that my voice had the right possibilities for the Bach cantatas, a bass baritone with enough low notes for what Bach sometimes requires, but also enough high notes and agility for the coloraturas that are required. That was the beginning.
And how did you get connected with that Bach cantata project?
Yes, that was again a lot of luck and being there at the right moment, right spot. As a young singer, after this choral period, I wanted to become a soloist, and I sent out audition tapes to various recording companies. In those years, you still had the LPs, and later the CDs, and now it's all stream or whatever it's called. And all of them did not answer or send me a letter that they didn't need me at that moment, except one from Hamburg. There was a telephone call from Herr Wolf Erichson.
Ah, yeah.
He became later a very important man in recording early music, not only with Harnoncourt and Leonhardt, but also in Canada with Tafelmusik. They were very closely related to Wolf Eriksson. This was Telefunken, and later it got different names. And he said, Mr. van Egmond, I listened to your recording, and it just so happens that right now we need exactly that kind of singing for a project that we are going to start. And that was the 200 Bach cantatas and other early music recordings, Telemann and Handel and Monteverdi and so on. So that's how I got involved. I had to meet Gustav Leonhardt and Harnoncourt, and that's how they got started with me, because they followed the advice of Wolf Eriksson.
And did they tell you how they wanted you to sing, or how did you come to sing the Bach cantatas in the ways that you did?
Yeah, there you have a very good point. Both Leonhardt and Harnoncourt were instrumentalists and conductors, but not at all singers. So when I asked them, okay, you've chosen me, but how do you want me to sing this? And should I change some things? And what should I do with this ornament and all that? They said, listen, we are not singers. We have chosen you because we like your singing and it's approximately what we want. So just go on like that. But that didn't satisfy me, because I wanted to know more, of course, how if I had to start an appoggiatura from the upper note or from the lower, and how to do a slur and a trill and whatever, messa di voce. So I started reading many books written about that. Caccini, for one, has in his introduction, he tells you about the messa di voce and ornamentation. But also, I observed how Harnoncourt and Leonhardt were rehearsing with their ensembles, giving the instrumentalists detailed instructions of what to do, and saying nothing to me, no detail, nothing. So I said to myself, you have to translate their way of speaking to the instrumentalists into vocal vocabulary. So I sat there during rehearsals in a chair by the side, and I made my notes, and I tried to understand what instruments do. A viola da gamba, for instance, where you can see the left hand, but on the shorter notes, there is no vibrato, but in the longer note, pa, 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 you see the vibrato in the hand and you hear the vibrato. So as a singer, don't have a constant vibrato everywhere, but just important notes and things that need a bit more feeling. Also, the viola da gamba is specialists in messa di voce, crescendo, decrescendo, which singers should do according to Caccini. So I tried that. And bit by bit, you read, you think, you try, and you just develop a way of singing early music which does justice to the technique of healthy singing in any style, but also to the special requirements of early style.
Max, one of the things I've admired in your singing is your use of dynamics. You use different sound levels rather than the sort of continuous sound that we hear from many other singers. Does that have something to do with language or expression or articulation?
All the above, I would say. You need to get a good understanding of the language in which you're singing. And for me, as a Dutchman, it's practically always a foreign language, but also American young singers, they sing more often in Italian, German, French than in their own language, I think, except for occasional Messiah or Purcell. Yes, you should really study the language with all the very special things. let me, for instance, about double consonants in a German word, hatte. Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis. That's double T and double M in Bekümmernis. Now, in German, that should sound double. But when you sing French, a double consonant should not sound double because the French language is much more a legato language and the German language is a little more a marcato language because of this. So German and French need a different approach with double consonants. Another example, so-called aspiration of certain consonants. The P, the K, and the T in English, they have a little H behind them. People are not so aware of it, but you say T for two and coming. You don't say T for two and coming, T for two and coming. So there's this little. So what did the singers do? They started to sing even stressed all through, because you just mentioned those differences in louder and softer.
Yes.
So the singers learned from day one, sing even stressed, forget about unstressed syllables, forget about declamation like you would do in speech, just sing even stressed and also legatissimo, because all the time you spend between notes and which you devote to consonants perhaps, or to phrasing and articulation, that's all a loss of time, because you won't be heard. You just have to produce sound from beginning to end. Okay, now that is okay in Puccini and in Wagner, but it's awful in Purcell or Caccini or Bach even. So I had to learn this stressing and unstressing, and what is a very good learning tool for that is secco recitatives, because in an aria, of course, you want to sing a little more cantabile, which gives more legato, a little more even stressed, but in secco recitatives, you should really speak on pitches, on different pitches, but it should be basically speaking, quasi parlando. So
yes. Well, so it sounds as though to you the consonants are almost are as important as, or more important than the vowels. That it's the delivery of language that a singer is actually doing in the world of Baroque music, at least.
Yes, there are. Say, I think that those singers today that are intelligent and wise, they will always try to articulate well enough for people to understand the text. But in the early days, it was a very important part of the upbringing of a singer to learn articulation and how to handle consonants. Of course, vowels, you don't have to work so hard because you have your mouth open, you give a sound, and that's your vowel. And as long as the vowel is stretched out, it's heard. But a consonant is either, when it's an unvoiced consonant like P, T, and K, either it's a very short moment with a sort of a little explosion, or when it's a voiced consonant, M, Z, L, then it has some length and it could carry a bit of voice, a bit of sound. So that is what I try for myself and for my students, to be very aware of consonants serving the singing, that a voiced consonant is really filled with voice and resonance, so that the sound is not interrupted. Because say the voice teachers who don't know better, they say, oh, forget about those consonants because they are interrupting to the flow of your sound. Whereas I say, no, try to fill the consonants with sound so that there is still sound going on, but in a different color and with a different letter, as it were, different letter of the alphabet.
It creates much more variety, but it's so interesting to hear you say that you learned a great deal about singing Baroque music from observing Baroque instruments perform. Since so many instrumentalists, in a way, aspire to sing with their instrument, it's interesting that you, a singer, are interested in being like an instrument in certain ways. One, they learn from each other. What experience have you had in situations that happen sometimes, I guess, in arias and elsewhere, where you're singing in unison with instruments, with one or more instruments? What's that experience like for a singer?
Yes. It's a heavenly experience, because when your sound is combined with the sound either of an instrument or another singer in a duet or something, that's wonderful, because you suddenly feel sort of a melting of the two timbres and balancing them and so on. But the interaction between instruments and vocalists is so important. I will, before I answer more of your question, tell you about how the instruments try the same as what I've described from myself, to learn from the singers. As you said also, when we would prepare for those recordings of the Bach cantatas, then Lucie van Daal, the concertmaster of Leonhard Consort, would get up and look over my shoulder onto my score, and she said, I want to know your words, because we have the same melody, the Vorspiel, the introduction, all the same melody, and then the singer takes over, but the singer has the text. She says, I want to know your words because I want to have the same articulation, commas, full stops, breaths, and so on, so that my playing your melody will be like declaiming. Now, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, very beautiful.
They all do that. So now your question about singing with an instrument. Well, here the first word that comes to mind is vibrato. If a singer would have a standard vibrato on each note, like what happens so often, also with romantic violinists, then I would sing with my and say an oboe would play a very straight note. And that, of course, would cause out of tune sound, because the one of the two is vibrating and the other has a straight tone. So you have to adapt to whatever you hear around you. As I said, the viola da gamba would have crescendo decrescendo, messa di voce. The violin would have occasional vibrato, modestly so. A trumpet, which happens sometimes, would have a little bit of marcato or march-like approach. And so you just listen, you imagine, while you're already studying, without even having heard the instrument, you imagine what they would do, what they would sound like. And then during rehearsals, you're in seventh heaven, because you can have this fun of adapting to one another.
You always sound committed when you're singing those Bach arias, Max. It's really wonderful. You have also spent some time recording the classic song cycles, lieder cycles with forte pianos, right? Have you learned a lot about I don't know, Schubert and Schumann? I don't think you've done Fauré, Debussy, that kind of repertory with period pianos. Is that right?
Yes, yes. One of the person, because many people that I owe so much to, but one from your country is Malcolm Bilson.
Ah, yes.
You needn't introduce him, the star on the fortepiano. I had the luck of performing with him and others. So he's very inspiring. In Belgium, there is Jos van Immerzeel, who is the conductor of an ensemble called Musica Eterna, something like that. Anyhow, he plays the fortepiano also. In Japan, there is Masaki Suzuki,
Yeah.
who is known as a conductor, but he is also a very good fortepiano player. All these people I've had the luck to perform Schubert and others with. So they were very inspiring as such, but I had to sort of get ready with the approach of the poetry, the language, the approach. And well, here I did what I can recommend to everybody: just read and listen and think. There is a lot written about Schubert and Schumann and Fauré and all these. Now, Schubert, of course, let's take him. He started when he was poor and he finished and he was still poor. So he had enormous talent, but never got to play in the bigger halls for bigger audiences. His concerts were with his friend Vogel, the baritone who sang his songs in the surroundings of a living room with a handful of friends around them. So most of the lead recitals of Schubert were Hausmusik, as it's called. So that tells me, please try an intimate approach rather than an operatic approach. And of course, if you are lucky enough to do it in a reasonable small recital hall, then that's easy enough. When you're in a very big hall, then you must use oil painting instead of watercolor. So it must be a bit thicker. But in general, try to have it intimate. Then also in another book about Schubert, I read, this book is called Zeugnisse seiner Zeitgenossen, which means news from his contemporaries. So the friends of Schubert wrote about him in letters and whatever. So in this book, there's one letter by somebody who was in the audience. He said, the other day, I was at the house of this and that person, and Schubert and Vogel gave a recital of some new songs. It was wonderful. It was beautiful, but such a pity. Somewhere in the middle, we had to stop because both the audience and the two artists were so in tears that it didn't make sense to go on.
Oh.
So, in other words, and this is what we know from other sources, the people living in the high romantic period were just much more openly emotional. They would show their emotions. Tears were flowing every week, whereas in my experience, I have been weeping maybe once or twice during funerals, but when else do you weep or do you laugh? And apparently in those years, the newspaper letters to the editor were written by amateurs, by the people reading, but they would write it as poems, and also other news was also written in poetry. So people were just much more romantic. And so that tells me, when you sing Schubert, try to be very sensitive, very expressive, but in small scale, not like in Wagner, of course. So that comes to, and then of course the text is, and the the way you can understand text and the way you treat the different languages. Singing English art song requires a knowledge of classical English, French, the same thing, German, the same thing. It's all makes a big difference.
It sounds as though you try very hard to adapt yourself to the music that you're singing rather than using the same technique and style for everything you do.
Yeah, that is the indeed the difference. I used some minutes ago the word late romantic approach to music, to any music. Violinists learn to play legatissimo. You shouldn't hear the change of bow, and the vibrato should always be there, even on the shortest notes. Singers would be told what I said before about over legato and even stressed and all that. Because, as you just said, the main thing is to show the world the beauty of your voice and the power of your voice. And of course, I have a little bit of that also. I'm not free of vanity, but at the same time, it's just more fun to do something with that voice and make it serve different purposes. If you have a
yeah, in a way, that's maybe the difference between the early music approach to music and whatever else there is in the world. And you've been involved in this early music, whatever it is, and many other things for a long time. What changes do you think you've seen over the course of several decades now that you've been actively involved in music making?
Yeah, that was very thrilling, and also a privilege that I was able to witness this from the beginning till, well, the end of today. In the beginning, playing and singing early music in the authentic way, so-called authentic way, was something very special for specialists. I think of August Wensinger and other people of that very first generation. Catherine Mines, for instance, and her husband who were students of August Wensinger and started BPI in Oberlin. So it was very specialized for the happy few, and in general, the music world looked at it as, oh, how should we put this? Maybe you can advise me. Something very uneasy, abnormal, weird, and something you can, you restrict to the very special homes, the very special series of programs. But in between, you're happy to go back to a string quartet that Brahms and whatever in the usual way. But bit by bit, year after year, well, decennium after decennium, you saw that both the audiences and the orchestras got used to that approach. And I'm happy to say that in Holland, it was maybe beginning that way. You know, Harnoncourt, with his Concentus Musicus, they sometimes made tours in Europe and would come to Amsterdam and to The Hague, to big cities in my country, and play. And what happened a year or two after, Harnoncourt gets an invitation from the Concertgebouw Orchestra, the big, ultra-romantic classical orchestra in Amsterdam. And they said, Mr. Harnoncourt, would you please come conduct us and teach us how to approach Baroque music, because we do St. Matthew Passions every year. We are sometimes invited for a Messiah, or some Haydn, in addition to, of course, all the Bruckner and
Yeah.
Wagner and whatever they did. And this happened. Harnoncourt was in seventh heaven, because if anybody was trying to spread out his world and his activities, it was him. So he started working with the Concertgebouw orchestra, all modern instruments, romantic approach, and teach them how to play Bach. And I think he conducted a few performances of St. Matthew Passion, which they were used to playing for decades. And this was the beginning in Holland that romantic orchestras started to be interested in the Baroque approach. In Den Haag, The Hague, there were residential orchestra did the same thing, and Rotterdam did the same, and so on and so on. The opera in Amsterdam started very carefully to doing Monteverdi operas. Pierre Audi was the intendant, the director who took the initiative and all that. And they approached Baroque ensembles to accompany. So that was very nice to see. And I can almost feel your next question about how is it today? How has it developed?
What about today? What about tomorrow, Max?
Well, tomorrow I can't really tell, but today what I see is that the Baroque approach is completely established in all the big music centers, in New York, in San Francisco, in Boston, wherever, in London, in Paris, in Rome. Well, in Rome, maybe not so much, but almost. The big important orchestras, they know how to sing Baroque. Just like very big opera stars know how to sing a Handel opera nowadays. They have just kept their eyes open and their ears and their hearts, and they know what to do. Even on modern instruments, they can articulate, they can regulate the vibrato, they can do messa di voce, all sorts of things, and singers too. But at the same time, and now we're probably leaning to the future, we know that the modern development of instruments, but also of opera houses and stage sets, the technical approach of lights and stage sets and mise en scène and all that, we are so used to seeing that in an avant-garde way, in a modern and even daring approach, that perhaps what we'll see in the near future is a combination of those things, that early music will still be done more or less stylish, but with the means of modern techniques. I'm now thinking of opera, for instance, with bigger stages and maybe a little bit of amplification. So we'll probably see a compromise of old and new.
Well, it remains to be seen. I hope your prediction goes in good directions. I mean, that could lead to all sorts of wonderful creativity in the future. It could also lead to things that you and I might not like, but we don't get to choose everything, do we?
Yeah.
Anyhow, you have made an enormous contribution to the variety and quality of music making in the world, Max, you and your colleagues. And I think we all owe you a huge debt. I'm grateful to you today for your for your deep thinking. You've thought very long and hard about what you do. And I think that intelligence and the heart that you bring to what you've been talking about here today also shows in your music. And it will be a great thing for the rest of the world to hear the wonderful conversation that I've had today with Max van Egmond. Thank you very, very much, Max.
Thank you, Tom, and good luck to you.